Hello, everyone. I am so glad that you were able to join. And I just wanted to play that little intro because hopefully you're not running away. But I am so excited today because we're going to have our health tech highlight with Dr. Maiysha Clairborne. And I just want you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Akita, for having me on today. I am a physician, family physician by training. However, what I primarily do is I teach organizations and leaders how to cultivate a space where people feel seen, heard, respected, and valued in their organization. So I am um, a consultant for around psychological safety and culture and trauma informed communication, and I love seeing people thrive, and that's primarily what I do.
That is awesome. So you're just sprinkling a little like thriving energy on everyone. And I'm so excited to chat with you because we've chatted a few times before
Yeah.
and you have so much to share, especially with organizations who are working
Mhm.
around building up cultures because we know that cultures are so important in terms
Mhm.
of workplace safety, workplace productivity, all the things. So you are a culture creator and you work to help organizations create a workplace where leaders and employees thrive, as you just said.
Mhm.
So, how do you do that?
Well, so there are a couple of domains in which I operate, and one of them is coaching, and then another is in the training domain. Primarily, I work from a paradigm of self first, self development first, and a people approach, because I'm a firm believer that we need systemic change, but the systems are made of people, and the policies are made by people, and our organizations, what makes the organization run is people. And so in order to create cultures that thrive, we have to look at what is the interaction between people, and a lot of that boils down to communication. And so I talk a lot about psychological safety and cultivating trust, because when we're thinking about human connection, that's whether it's leader to direct report, to clinician to clinician, or even clinicians to patient, the first thing that's happening is human connection. And that human connection is the first opportunity where people are going to feel safe and trust, or whether they're going to automatically put walls up. And if a wall is put up, if people are not feeling safe, then there's this level of survival response that kicks into gear, and it impacts on a person's ability to be productive and to thrive and to communicate and to decision make. And so how I work with people, whether it's an individual who recognizes that they need to improve their skills or expand their skills of communication, or expand their skills of emotional intelligence, or whether it's a community or an organization of or faculty of physicians and leaders who know that in order to create a different culture, they need to expand their capacity to create a culture of safety and trust. I do that through my training, I do that through my coaching and speaking, and I do that through an online course that I've created, that's designed to be put out into large organizations.
I love that because personally, I feel as though culture is the most important thing for an organization. Without
Mhm.
that, everything else will kind of fall apart. Have
Yeah.
you seen that happen in any organizations before?
Well, I mean, I'm seeing it happen in multiple organizations. So I just did a talk with a large hospital yet 2 days ago at the time of this recording, and I start by talking about what psychological safety is, and then move into how lack of safety and lack of trust affects organizations. And one of the biggest things that I see is that it impacts well-being, because when you have a bunch of employees, clinicians, staff, um, leaders even who are always looking over their shoulder, then it creates a sort of hypervigilance, and that wears on you physically and mentally over time. And as I was sharing this, and then I always ask, who can relate to this? There was over 500 people on the training in of itself, and the chat was pouring in about how many people have experienced this sense of feeling burned out and feeling unsafe. So we know that it's impacting our healthcare organizations, and we know if when there are numerous studies that have been done that talk about how burnout impacts patient care, how it impacts bias, how it impacts decision-making capacity. And so we're seeing it in lots of organizations, but specifically, I've seen it in many of the organizations that I've spoken with, healthcare and non-healthcare.
Absolutely. So you just mentioned that one thing that you like to define when starting with an organization is what is psychological safety? So can you tell us like what is it and why it's important, especially in healthcare?
Sure, absolutely. So, psychological safety is the experience of being able to feel included, to be able to express oneself, to be able to learn and make mistakes, to explore and experiment, and to be able to challenge the status quo and report without the fear of retaliation, humiliation, um, without the punishment, and there's another word that's right there, but without the fear of backlash. And so that's the experience of psychological safety. And one of the authors of this book called Four Stages of Psychological Safety, Timothy Clark, talks about there being four stages. So the safe to feel included, safe to learn, safe to contribute, and safe to challenge. And so when those four elements are not in place, and particularly when inclusion safety is not in place, then we don't have safety.
I definitely agree that that's a cornerstone of everything that needs to be at a healthcare organization,
Mhm.
especially with us having this health tech highlight, and a lot of health tech organizations are startups where
Mhm.
there may be opportunities for learning from both sides, from both the product development
Absolutely.
side as well as the healthcare and clinical side.
Mhm.
And with that, sometimes there may be things that need to be changed and we need to speak up. So sometimes
Mhm.
clinicians, I like to say that there are two frames of thinking when we're creating digital health products, where
Yeah.
we have the clinical brain where everyone thinks through the scientific method and we love to put a hypothesis forward. We love to think through things, create clinical trials, experiments, all the things that we need to do to ensure patient safety. And
Yes.
then we put out things that have been studied and that are evidence based in order to kind of help our patients. Whereas in product development, engineers love to think through the design thinking method, which is also awesome, where
Yeah.
they could come up with a hypothesis. They want to
Mhm.
do certain developments of the problem, and then they want to put the lowest hanging fruit. So they want to put the bare minimum so they can
Mhm.
see what's gone wrong in order to fix it.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful in certain situations. But when you're dealing with human lives, that's kind of a we don't want to test to see what's going wrong. So
Yes.
there are a lot of opportunities for collaboration and education, and we need
Mhm.
to have psychological safety in that place so that people who have different experiences and are subject matter experts in those things can speak up, feel safe, and then we won't have the clashing, but people will just kind of move forward to do what's best for the people that they're serving.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that, there can be an assumption that people feel safe. There can be an assumption that people trust leadership or trust the organization, and it's all based on how people are socialized. There are certain groups of people who are socialized to think that they're automatically trustworthy, and so when that happens, then there's no inquiry to other communities about, well, what's the feedback? Like, how do you feel? How is your experience inside of the organization, especially when there's a bottom line to meet?
Absolutely. Do you know or can you name some common signs that a workplace may experience, like some things to look out for, some red flags when a workplace actually lacks psychological safety?
Yeah. What I'll share is that um, when you're looking at the the stages of trust, or when you're looking at how a lack of trust and safety impacts an organization, by the time the signs show up, we're kind of more in the late stages. So early on, distrust and unsafety may be invisible if not inquired around to the organization, and that may show up as a feeling of, this whole low level burnout. You may start to get some disengagement, and it may be peppered throughout the organization. But when you start to get disengagement of whole communities, when you start to see high turnover, when you start to see even complaints of discrimination or complaints of feeling unsafe, and no one's doing anything about it. When you start to get complaints of being gaslit or gaslighted, right? So gaslighting is one. When there are complaints of unequal accountability for some but not for others. When there are some complaints of micromanagement, that's a very subtle sign. Water cooler talk or gossip, those are subtle signs that can indicate a culture where people can't feel safe or don't trust. And so these are just a few things that you can start to look for and see, are you seeing these things in your organization? Because if you are, they are disruptors of trust and safety. And if you're seeing them, it's likely already widespread. It's like I have a garden in my kitchen, and one of those hydroponic gardens. And in any garden, sometimes you can have pests show up in the garden. So you have to like manage the garden, tend to the garden, and these pests can show up. But sometimes there are certain pests that show up that by the time they show up, they have already infiltrated your entire garden. And
Mm.
that is the way it is with trust and safety. By the time you see the signs, distrust and unsafety have infiltrated the organization, and now you have to do the work to repair harm.
I love that. And it's all about doing the work, I think, because sometimes, with growth, with mergers, with creating new solutions, even in larger hospital systems. We love to talk about on this show, at least like health tech highlights. I keep
Mhm.
mentioning startups, but now every healthcare system is a digital health organization because
Mhm.
we are all becoming digitally enabled,
Yes.
and we're adopting these solutions. Sometimes people are maybe afraid of how to use them, maybe afraid to
Mhm.
speak up. They may be afraid that they're going to lose their jobs because
Yeah.
of certain things like AI and all of the other innovations that are coming forward.
Mhm.
So, how does your organization, Mind Remapping Academy, how does this concept kind of come about, and what are you doing with the organizations to help them work through these issues?
Well, just to kind of speak to what you said earlier, like shifting change can be difficult. And a lot of times what organizations like to do, leaders like to do, is just puts policies in place, which is fine, right? But when you do without with neglecting the personal work that must be done, which can sometimes be the most difficult work. Personal work can be the most difficult work. And that is the place that I come from. So, I do use some digital technology to be able to meet the needs of larger organizations through like online coursework, through, of course, virtual engagements and things of that nature. However, I still try to impart upon um, the people that I teach and train and that I work with, that while this personal work may be difficult, they're not alone in it. And when you cultivate a community that feels safe to be able, and that has common experience, you cultivate more of that trust and safety. And so I create a container, both digital and in person. So I create a hybrid container that allows for the safety of that growth in the individual, so that they can begin to look at and re-examine the policies and the procedures that are in place.
I love that. And like you said, change is hard. So
Mhm.
there's always going to be change as we evolve. And we're
Yeah.
at the stage with a lot of healthcare organizations where there's a lot of change coming very rapidly. There
Mhm.
is change in terms of workflows,
Mhm.
there's change in terms of the needs of certain efficiency and productivity matters. There
Mhm.
is change in terms of implementing new innovations. There's
Mhm.
even change, even for those who are in the healthcare system, for rules and regulations that were not there before. We know that healthcare is a heavily regulated field, but there's even
Absolutely.
more regulation coming forward for the other implementations that we're doing in terms of AI innovation
Mhm.
or utilizing wearable devices. So
Yeah.
we have to roll with the punches, but we also have to bring our teams along because there's a lot of top down
Mhm.
leadership. But it seems like from what you're saying, like community is so important in
Mhm.
keeping your teams abreast of what's going on.
Yeah.
For the teams who have implemented some of these changes and acknowledged that there was not psychological safety there, um, how can they measure that there's improvement?
Well, I think so. Psychological safety and trust are one of those so some of those
Mhm.
I don't want to say abstract, but I'm going to use that word for lack of a better terminology in this moment, right? They're more nebulous. That's the word. They're sort of more nebulous things, and so you really have to survey. You really have to. That's one way, but the other way is you can measure it in terms of retention. You can measure in terms of various um, levels of productivity. You can measure it in terms of the well-being, and so burnout scores. So there are indirect ways to measure the level of safety and on a team. I think the probably the most effective way is just to actually have feedback, direct feedback from the people, right? And so when you have a team and the team is willing uh, to engage in this thing called psychological safety and cultivating trust, and you create a container where it can be named and where people are open to discuss what's working, what's not working, and what needs to be developed in order to create it. You have a before, and then you have checkpoints to really say, okay, what's not working, what's working, what needs to be improved. And at the end of the day, you measure by subjective feedback on the teams. But in a larger organization, you can look at things like the retention, and you can look at things like burnout scores and well-being and call outs and things of that nature.
Absolutely. And also, I think with you training leaders and things like that, I think it's very important to realize that you're only as strong as your leaders in your
Mhm.
team. So you
Mhm.
mentioned earlier about sometimes things that cause people to leave are smaller things like, oh, this is a big change. I'm nervous about this. But then there are
Mhm.
other things that kind of fuel the fire, like micromanagers.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is a way to teach things like emotional intelligence?
Absolutely. What's very interesting is I was just having this conversation and someone asked me the exact same question. So this is a very timely, emotional intelligence and teaching it. It's a very timely conversation. You can absolutely teach emotional intelligence. This is, I like to actually call it emotional fluency, because emotions are a language. They are a language. Oftentimes they can be, we use words to express it, but it's a nonverbal language, and it's an information. And so you can learn how to identify and name emotions. You can learn how to then self regulate, and you can learn how to then effectively communicate what you're feeling and listen and observe others and their emotional responses and respond to that. And that is essentially the skill of emotional intelligence. And so I say emotional fluency, I often refer to it as emotional fluency because when you're learning a new language, oftentimes you can begin to learn the vocabulary, certain words that constitute the language. Then as you're listening, you're understanding, okay, I understand some of these words, and you begin to speak some of the language. But the more you practice it back and forth with other people, the more fluent you get in the language. And so that is what emotional intelligence, or emotional fluency, I like to call it, it does. It gives you more fluency and flexibility of behavior in connection and interaction with people.
That's amazing. And I think that if people practice that more or even learned how to approach it, because everyone has a different style. Like
Mhm,
as you're leading teams, you may have one personality and it may be a wonderful
mhm,
personality, and the other person's may be completely different and they also may be wonderful. But
mhm.
figuring out how you can work together and communicate together to get
Yeah.
to the bottom line and move forward and work is something that I think that all organizations should invest in,
Mhm.
because it can really help your team complete their job.
Absolutely. It creates, it allows you to see the strengths in everyone, and to be able to leverage and utilize the strengths in their proper place. And so
Mhm.
if I'm an introvert, which I am, living in an extrovert world, and my extroverted colleague understands, okay, there are certain things that Maiysha needs in order to function. This is the way her brain works. Or if I'm a big picture person and my colleague is more of a detail person, right? There are certain things that I can compliment Maisha with, that when she has her big picture visions, I can go in with the details and make sure nothing is missing, fill in the gaps. So there, when you start to understand what people's preferences are, what their needs are, and part of this again is emotional fluency and emotional intelligence, being able to listen, to understand, and listen beyond the words. Then you can more effectively leverage people's strengths at any given time and give them what they need to bring their highest and best self. And that's how you increase productivity, and that's how you retain people as well.
I love that. You're just giving away all the tips. What is one thing that you wish that organizations would do or implement in order to improve workplace culture?
I wish they would invest in their own self development. That's what I wish they would do. If I were to be 100% honest, I think that there is just not enough attention given to personal development, and not only for themselves, but for like supporting their team members in that personal development. Sometimes I think that organizations feel like, oh well, this development is either only for leaders or only for the team, right? And so when you come together and you all say, and you all, are living the values and congruency and saying, yes, we all need this. And this is how we're all going to make things, we're all going to improve. And also, incidentally, I think that when we start to do that, we start to decrease the level of division, because we
Mhm.
start to see the humanity in each other rather than the division or the differences in each other. So I really do wish that um, organizations would take on more personal development, more emotional intelligence conversations, um, and then also support their staff in those conversations as well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So our conversation is coming to a close, unfortunately, and I know that we could probably talk for
Yeah.
hours, and I'm sure we'll probably have you back talking about another component of workplace development. But do you have any announcements?
Well, yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I'm doing, number one, is for any hospitals or healthcare organizations interested in hearing more about psychological safety. I am doing a training on September the 12th. It's a virtual training in collaboration with the Maryland Healthcare Education Institute, and it is called Psychological Safety: An Overlooked Imperative to Belonging, Workplace Wellness, and a Thriving Organization. And so that is coming up September 12th. I can give you the link so that you people can register, their organizations and leaders can register. It's going to be very, very, very exciting to be able to collaborate with MHEI for this. And then also, if you're wondering, well, how can I either have Dr. Maiysha to come in and speak, or start to look at ways that I can infuse psychological safety and trauma-informed communication into my organization, I do have an online training that I license out to organizations and that I teach leaders. And it's called Communication That Transforms, Creating Psychological Safety Through Trauma-Informed Communication. And so there are online previews. And then I'm finishing up probably by the end of this month an assessment. You asked about how to measure. And so I have been working on and creating an assessment for organizations so that they can take this assessment and look at what is the score, what is their trust and safety score, and that will give them an indication, a first indication of whether they need to dig deeper and have more training, have more consulting, have more speaking in this arena. When I did my talk yesterday, I was debriefing with the physician who invited me in, and she said, I think that we've tapped on a need we didn't know that we had. And I think that is the case with a lot of organizations. It's probably for the leaders, it's probably a need that you don't even realize that you have.
Absolutely. I think that so many organizations just need to take a look, even if they've been around for a while, even if they have all of their SOPs and things in place, to
Mhm.
just see what your employees need and see how to continually improve your culture, because as you grow, culture changes. So you
Mhm.
have to be aware and just be vigilant about what's happening in your organization, as well as being proactive, because a lot of organizations are quite sometimes reactionary, and that's just human nature. But
Mhm.
what great things would it be to just be proactive and just plan as you're going through the changes? So I love all of that. We'll get the links and we'll put it in the chat here and share it for you guys if you're watching this later, because I know that some of you guys may be just getting to work. Some people may be at lunch. You may want to watch it later. So we'll have it here on LinkedIn indefinitely. And we're also going to share it on our LinkedIn for Digital Risk Compliance Solutions. So you can check it out there too. And click all the links, get all the courses, share with your friends, share with healthcare executives. And I really appreciate you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you for having me.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.